Welcome to this, my 10th installment of Video Fuzzy. I've decided that every 10th episode, including this one, will include a show so far on my cataloging efforts and what I've been finding. And while fall premieres took some attention away from those efforts this past week, particularly my current collection, they fit in pretty well with my Friday night feature, an oddly relevant double episode of My Name is Earl. Welcome to the show.
He doesn't have that on video, does he? We'll find out together on Video Fuzzy.
I'll start with a look back at this collection, not just since I started this podcast, but since I began this effort back in Minot sometime in, it looks like May of 2007 or so.
Diving into the classic collection.
It was all so long ago that on my very second homemade DVD, there's an episode of a series I'd completely forgotten about, and I mean completely, with David Spade as a snarky host of a Hollywood millworks called The Showbiz Show, which is absolutely a snake eating its own tail. Once I'd Googled it, it all came rolling back to me. Well, no, not really. I had to pop it in and watch it to remember exactly what this thing was. In and among a lot of standard fare I'm not planning to rehash here, I've got the quirky detective series Reigns, where Jeff Goldblum sees dead people and chats them up about their murders. Totally pulling a Pushing Daisies vibe on that. There was a Fox action-adventure series starring Nathan Fillion called Drive, centered on an illegal cross-country drag race. There was an improv show called Thank God You're Here, the Eddie Izzard Mini Driver Flim Flam Family The Riches, and the private investigator wizard The Dresden Files. And that's all just within my first 20 discs or so. Idly paging back through what I cataloged prior to starting this blog and podcast effort, I've encountered some truly remarkable programming, including a live performance of The River by Good Charlotte on Leno, a couple of History Channel pieces called Banned from the Bible, a psychological crime drama called The Inside, starring Rachel Nichols and Adam Baldwin, the Mystery Science Theater 3000 presentation of Hamlet, the Courtney Cox tabloid drama Dirt, a psychological crime thriller set in San Francisco called Killer Instinct, and, oh wow, a truly wild crime drama called Touching Evil. Loved that show. I will absolutely have to revisit that at some point. I saved a segment where I appeared on a noon show to promote a community theater production of Agatha Christie's Toward Zero. That was pretty wild. My character was in his 80s, and I shaved my head for it. There was an, in hindsight, rather outlandish cop drama I kept called Blind Justice. Nice premise, but, well, we don't see a whole lot of blind cops out there, do we? About 75 discs into this process, I encounter episodes from the first season of Lost. I've got Robin Williams in a psychological thrill piece called The Final Cut, exploring the manipulation of memory and personal history that seems a bit meaningful to me in pursuing this project here. I've got a Discovery Channel documentary called The iPod Revolution, and I see I've archived episodes of 6 Feet Under as cleaned up for rebroadcast on Bravo. I see I've cataloged episodes of the Battlestar Galactica reboot on Sci-Fi, and by my 100th disc, I see I've archived episodes of the very clever Shakespearean tragicomic exploration of Slings and Arrows, wherein a struggling theater company seeks to present towering Shakespeare tragedies while overcoming, well, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. There are star-crossed lovers, a busybody ghost, clowns and fools building to everyone rooting for happy ending. That's not halfway through my classic catalog prior to this effort, and I've already encountered hours of programming I'd love to revisit at some point. Stuff I knew I had somewhere, and stuff I'd already forgotten I'd already cataloged. Continuing in this vein, I see the adorable pilot episode of Andy Barker, P.I., starring Conan's sidekick Andy Richter in a delightfully comic take on gritty crime dramas. I managed to archive my VHS copy of Sally Fields and Sybil, and holy crap, I've got copies of Johnny Depp as Ed Wood, And the producer's 2005 remake with Matthew Broderick, Nathan Lane, and Uma Thurman as Ulla Inga Hansen Benson Janssen Tallen Holland Sudden Swanson, later Bloom. I've also cataloged episodes of Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip, Veronica Mars, and Deborah Messing in something called The Starter Wife, the title of which frankly sounds a little cynical. I've got copies of the Fosse biopic All That Jazz, Michael Douglas in The Game, and Fabulous, the story of queer cinema. There's Batman Begins, So I Married an Axe Murderer, Being John Malkovich, and Higher Learning, wherein Tori Amos's moody interpretation of REM's Losing My Religion hits a crackling crescendo over portrayal of date rape, so that's a pretty powerful piece of cinema. I see I've also got a 2003 movie called Intermission, set in a small Irish village and centered around a harrowing breakup, the aftermath of which splays out to affect everyone in town. Sounds like a wild story. I don't remember it at all. So many movies. I've got Rob Roy, Cecil B. Demented, Kinsey, Macaulay Culkin in Party Monster, in Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill Parts 1 and 2, and Reservoir Dogs, and Saved, not a Quentin Tarantino film, The Hudsucker Proxy, and Thank You for Smoking. I see where I archived my Touching Evil VHS tape a second time, which is weird since I really should have been discarding them after they were digitized. I know it's not just a second tape with the same episodes, because there's a music video by the Polyphonic Spree between the same two episodes it was between an earlier disc, so it was weird to see that again. As I get into the 180s, I see several episodes of The Universe, the pilot episodes of Lifetime's Side Order of Life, and Spike TV's action miniseries The Kill Point. Peeking past my 200th disc, I've got Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole in Beckett from 1964, Zach Braff in 2004's Low Energy Garden State, Willem Dafoe in the crime drama The Reckoning, Daniel Craig being awesome in Layer Cake, and IFC's Indie Sex Censored, closing out my first case of homemade DVDs. Heading into the case of DVDs I'm currently working through, yes, there are this many discs, and I'm doing it on my own limited spare time, so it takes exactly this long. I'm in and among some very familiar titles, and what feels like some timely revisits. I've got episodes of J. August Richards in Conviction, and hey, this thing says I do have the pilot episode of AMC's Hustle. Wild. I also kept the pilot episode of What About Brian, which I see now is probably a little insensitive, but his coupled friends clearly meant well. I've got Reno Williams as Tyrese Evans in an episode of Heist, episodes of James Nesbitt being amazing in Jekyll, and oh wow, bringing this whole process full circle, I see where I have saved a copy of My Big Fat Independent Movie from the Sundance Channel, which in fact answers the crowdsourcing question I had in the second episode of this podcast. And reading reviews, I can see why nobody knew what this clip was from. The Internet Movie Database asserts that this was one of the most spectacular box office flops of all time, costing $3 million to produce and making less than 5,000 in theaters, so wow, no wonder the internet itself wanted to just pretend that this piece of nonsense never existed. From what appeared as we started this process to have been a let us never speak of this again anomaly, I see where I grabbed a second episode of David Spade in the Showbiz Show, and oh wow, I kept a copy of what we all thought at the time was the series finale of Will and Grace. Chills. More on that in a bit. Things I'm still looking forward to. I saw that I had several episodes of the third season of Boston Legal cataloged, but not, it appears, from the first part of the third season, which is when Tyler Labine appeared as an assistant DA, so it seems I still have that to look forward to. I recorded and archived several individual episodes of things I was watching in closer to real time, but great chunks of my favorite shows are yet to be found in and among the thousands of discs I have yet to catalog, so definitely something to look forward to. There's also a couple things I know I'd flip if I encountered anywhere in this archive. I saw many presentations of the Hudsucker Proxy scheduled while flipping around the grid, but one film I'd love to see sometime is Bruce Willis in Hudson Hawk. Also, I know I've recorded copies of the sequels, but I'd love to see the first installment of Darkman again. I always enjoyed that piece. So, those are the highlights and best ofs that I lightly skipped over by starting this podcasting process with Patty Hughes on disc 229, less these two, the episode of the universe featuring The Life and Death of a Star on disc 227, and oh my yes, one of my very favorite pieces, Martin Short's appearance on The Late Show with David Letterman in 2006, singing Won't Do the Late Show, which, interestingly enough, does not appear to be available anywhere online. Nowhere I can find it anyway. So, once again, I'm freshly enamored of this collection and this process. By the numbers, I have thus far cataloged 339 discs in my classic collection of 2,570 discs, representing approximately 680 hours of video. I have also cataloged nearly half of my current collection, 47 discs of I Just Popped In Disc 111, this effort representing approximately 280 hours of video. 10 episodes in, I am loving this process of discovery and rediscovery. I love the challenges and curveballs my collections sometimes throw at me, and the problem solving involved in tracking down episodes, reconciling conflicting information, and occasionally the processing of the discs themselves, where they sometimes even need to be transferred to a new disc in order to retain potentially lost media. There is also the learning of new things. Case in point, along with the bizarre recataloging of 4 Touching Evil episodes on discs 70 and 168, I realized with a certain amount of of course, why sometimes I had scraps of episodes recur on subsequent discs. This archivist was constantly reusing VHS tapes, so sometimes, when I'd mostly fill a tape and set it aside for dubbing, there might be a scrap of past prior programming at the end of it, which my DVD dubber would faithfully retranscribe, and then in the cataloging process I'd encounter the same scrap of, say, Poirot's Peril at End House over and over again. I'm not sure why that didn't just instantly occur to me, but as we've just seen with this installment, I'm forever learning new things about my collection. In prepping for this installment, I spent much more time this past week watching fall premieres and making this deep dive into my classic collection, so I didn't make any progress on my current collection. I'll take a harder look at that for this next installment. For now, I'll talk about what I've been watching.
What I've been watching.
First, a hearty welcome back to Eric McCormick, Deborah Messing, Sean Hayes, and Megan freaking Mullally in the return to network airwaves of Will and Grace. I'd never watched this show when it was basically a 90s sitcom airing mostly during the W administration. I saw where I'd clearly archived the final episode of the original run when, and this is mainly what I picked up from watching reruns on Lifetime on weekends over the past year, the most groundbreaking thing they were doing by the end of this series was introducing a gay bear and My Fair Ladying him into a standard issue New York club scene gay. Don't get me wrong, it was fun watching Leslie Jordan mince about and Megan Mullally play an American version of Patsy Stone, but I was constantly confusing Eric McCormick for Thomas Gibson and wishing Thomas Hayden Church would make a guest appearance. As for Sean Hayes, I thought Jack's strongest episode was one where all of the characters mostly interacted with off-screen characters, and in his case was auditioning for an otherwise not especially communicative lightbulb. In the reboot, they scrapped the flash-forward storyline of the 2 title characters having kids who meet up for the first time, wow, how unlikely was that, when they enroll for their freshman year in college. Will is pursuing a conservative senator, and Karen gets Grace a gig remodeling the Oval Office, during which adventure Jack outs the entire Secret Service, and Kate Micucci points out that White House protocols aren't really a thing anymore. They've added an assistant to Grace's office, Anthony Ramos as Tony, who so far has mostly interacted with Karen off-screen. They quip and zing, building to a closing scene featured a red ball cap on the chair behind the Resolute desk, Make America Gay Again. I don't have a lot to say about it. It's entertaining and fun to look in on old friends. I think television executives really ought to try coming up with new ideas instead of rehashing 24 and Prison Break and Gilmore Girls and Twin Peaks, but as Ralph pointed out, if it wasn't Will and Grace, it would just be 2 other people. And two other people are not necessarily interesting enough to helm a network discussion of gays in American society as Will and Grace, despite the fact that they are now 11 years older, which is 1,000 in gay years, and while they're all shooting for skinny glam, they could use a real body-positive bear in the cast. We do not, cannot, and frankly should not all look like Sean Hayes. In other premieres, I watched The Brave on NBC and SEAL Team on CBS, in which elite squads of heroes are deployed overseas to rescue beautiful blonde women and assassinate high-ranking terrorists. Along with the 24 reboot, which opened 3 days before the inauguration, these shows appear to celebrate military solutions and violence in the face of an enemy that is specifically inhuman, abducting beloved, sympathetic, blonde Western women to, it is darkly suggested, do things to them, which we certainly have been told is part of the violence perpetrated by these evil, inhuman monsters in these strange foreign lands, and I know I am not the target audience for these shows. I won't be watching them. I think any other fall I'd have just let them slide by unwatched. But we really do need to talk about this stuff, because it is basically the Cardassian child pulled into John Luke's interrogation in Star Trek: The Next Generation, told, "Human mothers and fathers don't love their children as we do." We witness our nation's enemies, terrorists, as inhuman monsters, and it doesn't matter what happens to them. We accept that they are consumed with their hatred for America and hate freedom, and they're barely people, while these shows then contrast this by humanizing the bejabbers out of American operatives, give them families and backstories and demonstrations of their love of family and country. At some point, it will be helpful and necessary to explore what motivations our enemies have, what they're so willing to fight and die for, the fact that we need to deploy troops on 22-hour plane rides to go to other countries to fight them, and what our priorities and objectives are in doing so. Propaganda is a thing, and we should recognize its dissemination. In a time when protesting police brutality is recast as simply being unpatriotic, we really do need to be aware of it. Speaking of Star Trek, I was able to catch the first half of the pilot presentation of Star Trek Discovery, and I have to say I was mostly sort of impressed. I mean, deploying the two chief officers on an away mission feels like it could potentially have been a serious mistake, and sending a bridge officer into a disruption field with no backup seems also to have been a strange decision. But these quibbles to the side for a moment, Michael was a compelling character and her introduction was reasonably well crafted, and the Klingons are a fantastic antagonist. Unfortunately, I'd have to subscribe to a premium service in order to watch the second half of the premiere and all subsequent episodes. Not going to happen. I love Star Trek. This looks really good. It's got an incredible creative team behind it, not least of which initial showrunner Brian Fuller, and if the show airs on my TV, I'll totally watch it, but no, I won't be paying for it. Live long and prosper, little show. Another thing I'm not buying is the concept behind The Good Doctor, which has several issues, including how a child with no credentials is committing surgery on anyone in an airport. I get the emergency. At exactly the moment surgical residency candidate Sean Murphy arrives at the San Jose airport to interview for a position at St. Bonaventure, a crew fixing a sign has a mishap. The sign comes crashing down on the boy, there's glass everywhere, and absolutely nothing happens. I mean, at all. No ambulance service, no 911, just a helpful stranger who leaps in first to put pressure on the boy's wound and stanch the blood loss. Sean points out that he's misplaced where the carotid artery is on a boy, and that he is in fact strangling him. Sean then acquires a blade from the TSA and is momentarily targeted as a terrorist, because the TSA guy can't see that there's a medical emergency happening several feet away for some reason. He gets some tubing from the back of a vending machine and some alcohol from the duty-free shop, and yep, let's stop right here. Sean's autistic, but with savant syndrome, so he's got all of the usual magic these characters are infused with, and yeah, he's smart and focused, but how did he get through pre-med and his intern program to be a first-year resident without replacing the adorable concept of his brother or his pet rabbit having went to heaven in front of me with died? Doogie here, Sean, has been taken under the wing of St. Bonaventure President Aaron Glassman, played by Richard Schiff, who uses shouting and bombast to distract people from the situation that is staring them in the face, that this is not a surgeon. Yes, he saved the boy's life. Yes, he caught a heart monitor anomaly that saved him again. He can call up entire medical atlases at will, but everyone dismisses him as this broken wind-up toy. He doesn't seem to understand the importance of answering his cell phone, for one thing. He has trouble asserting himself, especially in this time filler situation written specifically to make older viewers giggle, I think, where a security guard has made it his job to keep Sean, specifically, out of the hospital. So when the board is looking for him to interview him, he can't get there. Even though he'd have gotten there very late anyway because he was busy saving the boy, mainly because it seems that the airport in San Jose has no emergency medical response team in place, so in case anything ever goes wrong, hopefully a not remotely qualified or credentialed surgeon will be on hand to MacGyver some kind of solution. In the end, he says he wants to be a surgeon because he wants to save his pet bunny. Seriously, I could not hear "Tell me about the rabbits, George," in these passages, and because he wanted to make a lot of money, because he wanted a TV. Oh, how sweet and charming, and he's become such a hero on social media. We should totally hire him, because if anything goes wrong at all, President Glassman said he'd resign, and this other ambitious doctor can take over, and surgical patients aren't remotely litigious, so they totally understand if he made a mistake. This is a solid pass. As I would say is Young Sheldon, a real think piece in which The Big Bang Theory's Jim Parsons recalls his days growing up with his otherwise ordinary family in Texas. His dad, as written, is more sympathetic than how Sheldon has described him in Big Bang, and the show is way more watchable than I assumed it would be, but this thing seems bent on highlighting how insufferable Sheldon was growing up. His mother walks him to and from his classes, he tattles on rule breakers and wears bow ties, and this is Texas, right? In the 90s? Why he was not given the first available swirly is beyond me. For as smart as Sheldon is written here, there is a lot he never quite got the hang of, and social cues is a big one. The peek at Professor Proton was a fun callback from the main show, but Bob Newhart won't keep me tuning into this. Finally, and this seems so long ago now, but USA aired the finale of Jessica Biel's The Sinner a couple weeks ago, and I've got to say it was a solid piece of atmospheric introspective storytelling, one that suggests karma is extremely patient sometimes. The way it held tension was to lock an important piece of the puzzle away in Cora's memory, the most important piece, the night of her sister's death, after which one of the members of the hunting club where it happened kidnapped Cora and for 2 months or so held her in his home, always with a creepy mask on, and dosed her with heroin so that afterwards, when she is dumped in an alleyway and makes it through rehab, any testimony she's able to give will be suspect at best. Fortunately, lead investigator on the case, Harry Ambrose, played by Bill Pullman, and I think law enforcement personnel would be able to comment on how many resources get devoted to solving closed cases already settled in court, just would not let her guilty plea stand. It's true that she presented an imperfectly open and shut case. There's no apparent motive for her lashing out, but it would be impossible to deny that she had, in fact, lashed out, so it wasn't that tough a case to make. He wanted to know why, and that led him down a rabbit hole through ultra-religious family mores, uncovering long-missing bodies, secret rooms, and ultimately the discovery of what happened to Cora. From a plea deal that would have locked her away for most of the rest of her life and that of her young son, she was vindicated, released with time served, and, in fact, her testimony helped bring down a multi-state opioid ring. Nice work, everyone.
Friday Night Feature.
Wrapping up with something I encountered while cataloging my classic collection, I ran into a double episode of My Name is Earl, set during Earl's stay in the Camden County Prison after his brother Randy takes a post as a guard, which, wow, I'd have to figure they'd really ignored the background check on that hire. Despite his past scrapes with the law, Randy is not instantly beloved of the inmates there, and despite his attempts to help, If you learn to obey the rules in here, no TV after 8, it'll be easier to obey the rules out there, like no murdering people and stuff. Brilliant reasoning, but not very persuasive, and the inmates taunt him until they are all distracted by a rebroadcast of Cops. Specifically, "Our Cops is on!" Randy calls out excitedly. The episode is set at the first 4th of July county fair after the 9/11 attacks, and we get to witness some small-town hicks perpetrate racial profiling and discuss civil liberties in an environment of a newly militarized police presence, played primarily by Mike O'Malley, Kathy Kinney of The Drew Carey Show, and Billy Gardell of Mike and Molly. After the Hickey brothers are shown stealing law enforcement equipment and setting off stolen fireworks, the episode reminds the inmates that Randy really is one of them, and they treat him better. It was also a chance to talk about racial profiling in, at the time, a post-9/11 America, now a more immigrant-intolerant America. Crabman Darnell Turner turning to the camera, saying that he's happy to be less of a target for the police certainly tracks, as does his caveat, "Although I sure feel bad for Hispanics." Indeed. And with that, I'd better wrap this up. Thank you for checking in on my video cataloging project. You can check out my catalog listing along with audio links at videofuzzy.blogspot.com and past episodes of this podcast at iTunes and videofuzzy.libsyn.com. Feedback is always appreciated, and you can contact me through my blog or podcast sites or through my Video Fuzzy page on Facebook. For Video Fuzzy, I'm Terry J. Ahman. Happy viewing.
It might be amazing, it might just be scuzzy. We'll find out together on Video Fuzzy.